Hello and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar on managing unstructured data and extracting value. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor at A-Team Group and will moderate today's webinar. Our expert speakers are Guraj Singh Sangha, Head of Data Science, Risk Market Intelligence, formerly at State Street, Dr. Edward M.L. Peters, Chief Innovation Officer at Panzura, and Rich Hale, Chief Technology Officer at ActiveNav. If you'd like to ask the experts any questions during the webinar, please submit them to us and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. I'm sure most of you are familiar with A-Team Group, but I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the plans we have for the next few months and into next year towards the end of the webinar. Okay, so let's get back to our speakers. And Guraj, can I come to you first? Please introduce yourself and tell us a little about your interest in unstructured data.
Sure. My background is entirely in financial markets, spanning a little over 20 years, and covered a broad range from fundamental analysis of various asset classes to quantitative analysis, and really the last several years, applying quantitative and in particular in that broad subset, machine learning and data science, initially for traditional ways of analyzing time series structured data and then other elements and aspects of that for holistic risk management and alpha generation. But the last few years, really diving deep into the vast amounts of unstructured data available, particularly textual data, and using natural language processing and various other algorithms around there to understand from a number of different ways how that data can be used either for increasing operational efficiencies for an organization, or from the trading world, applying it and extracting insights to help portfolio managers more efficiently manage risk, or different sources of generating returns and developing strategies. So it's a great area, and the amount of data that gets generated daily is extraordinary and continues to expand. And I would imagine many more breakthroughs to come in the months and years ahead.
Thank you very much indeed. Edward, coming to you, please introduce yourself.
I'm Edward Peters. I've spent most of my career in data, one type or another, ranging from modeling data to managing data for large corporations to consulting on the management of data, and really thinking about it across the entire supply chain from inception, creation, all the way through to storage and disposal. The key here, though, a lot of it is truly now how do we manage this, and what, as we just heard, how do you drag insights out of the data? So having spent a little bit of time in data science and studied that for a bit, the key, whether it's event data that comes from machines or whether it's user data that's actually in documents, all of these things contain really useful information, provided we know what questions we're asking, and really understanding what I'm now calling the provisioning of data, whether it's to the edge or in the cloud or on-prem to users. It's really, how do we understand the use of data, where it's needed to be used, where it should be stored, and how do we do that in an economically efficient fashion? Somehow understanding how to drag out the value. So that's really where I'm spending a lot of my time, and I, especially over the last, I'd say, 10 years, ranging a lot from applications in healthcare, predictive analytics, AI, machine learning applications, predicting outcomes for patients on certain diseases and on certain protocols, and to looking now at just how to do that for large corporations as they're understanding what this means to them in this time of people working from home in all different places. So,
okay, that's great. Thanks, Edward. Coming to you, Rich, tell us a little bit about your interest here.
Yeah, hi. Unlike Ed and Guraj, I started out in a completely different domain as an aeronautical engineer in the Royal Air Force in the UK, and I got involved in unstructured data when I was a victim of a large corporate migration project, which involved IT types moving data around and really not understanding what it was. So there's an angle that Ed brings, and I came at it from a user perspective. I got involved with how the organization as a whole understands the stewardship and ownership of its data, can visualize that data so it can actually do something sensible with it at the highest possible level. And so I left the Air Force, I joined Active Nav, and I've been involved in leading the design and build of and deployment and delivery of software solutions that let our customers look across all of their unstructured data sources, be it a SharePoint, a Slack, a file share, or whatever, and take stewardship and ownership of that data, which I think is the first mile requirement in any organization's use of data these days.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to that a bit later on. The first mile, it sounds good. The last mile, as it is here in telecoms. Okay, before we start on the discussion, here's a little outline of what we'll talk about today. We'll start with a definition of unstructured data and the extent to which the data is being used by FIs, and look at current use cases of the data and how these are expected to develop, as well as the business benefits of harnessing unstructured data and extracting value from the data. We'll also talk about the challenges of sourcing the data and integrating it with existing systems, and how to address the really difficult stuff, perhaps, of data quality, consistency, privacy, security, and compliance. We'll also discuss how to use tagging and cognitive search solutions to manage and enrich the data. And then, looking at the tech, we'll consider the skills and tools needed to build machine learning models that can extract the value, and how we can use cloud technologies to support management and use of unstructured data. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll share some examples of the beneficial use of machine learning. And finally, our experts will provide guidance for practitioners working with or planning to work with unstructured data. So there's going to be a lot about unstructured data. So let's get on with it. But first, let's run a quick audience poll to see how our audience's commitment to using unstructured data is. So the poll is there. The question, how committed is your organization to using unstructured data to deliver business value? 20 seconds to make up your mind on that one. So please vote just as soon as you like. It's great. Wow, nice outcome. 31% very committed. We are doing this. Where next? 28% very committed. We are planning to do this. 21% fairly committed. We are hoping to do this. 7% slightly committed. 14% not committed at all. Presumably they're not there yet, or it's just not something that'll be of great interest to them. So thank you for voting. And let me come to our speakers. Guraj, perhaps you'd like to comment on the poll, as well as offer a definition of unstructured data. Also, please tell us a little bit about how you see financial institutions using the data and which particular types are proving most popular at the moment.
Sure. The poll is, I think, reflective of the growing, broadly the growing interest in this space. It also, I think, it sheds light that there's, somewhat lack of clarity as to, what unstructured data is, and to the extent that it actually could be used in a broad array of industries. With respect to what it is, there's many competing definitions. I generally consider it any data which doesn't have a recognizable structure, as opposed to traditional either what you would consider in a database format, tables and things of that nature. It covers each data, subsets of broadly speaking, image data. It's really anything which is unstructured. There's just no definable structure, and very unordered. Really the opposite of what you would consider Excel, like for example Excel spreadsheet tables. But it covers a very, a broad area, and it doesn't line up well with, traditional relational databases and things of that nature. The other, important point is that the volume that is increasing at, I think, I've seen estimates as north of 60-70% per year, which is incredible for by any measure. And as there are a number of challenges associated with it, like growth retrieval, like the efficiency in managing the costs around it, which is something one of the other panelists mentioned. Now, with respect to financial institutions, where it's largely been focused on, at least in the recent past, is for essentially assessing the sentiment, associated either with particular, let's say, equity securities or asset classes, gauging the sentiment of various economic releases, speakers, and trying to correlate a gauge of that sentiment with movements in financial markets. There's been a fair amount of success, I'd say, with that approach, and it's but as with any technique in this space, as it gains prominence and yields good returns, the incremental alpha that gets generated tends to decay quite rapidly, and so more the other area which has been a bit more difficult, but there's been a lot more of area or work in it, is how to look at unstructured data and then particularly textual data from Reuters, Bloomberg News releases, and gain insights from there that can be informative. And that's an area that I've worked on, but it's an area that continues to see a lot of development.
Thank you very much indeed. What would you say here, Rich, in terms of definition and usage that you see amongst your clients?
I guess the pleasure of bringing different panelists together is we'll take this from a different angle. From our clients, we tend to be far more involved in risk compliance, stewardship, and governance of that data. And so use cases involve the need to respond to compliance and, for example, post-breach, identify the extent of a risk following a breach event, bringing organizations' data maps into line so that they can be compliant with GDPR and privacy regulation, and then things like managing business change, such as where contracts might expose businesses to risks, unknown risks. For example, they want to outsource a function. What are the contractual risks around that? And collecting and analyzing contracts. Libel might be another example, collecting and analyzing contracts in the wild to understand the extent of a risk and opportunity around those sorts of processes. So those are the use cases we're seeing. And I contrast Guraj's answer in that I tend to frame this as data in the wild, user-generated content where you really at the point of use can't predict how it will look. And so I tend to give examples like file shares, like SharePoints, like Box, like email, messaging, chat. Those are all the domains that we tend to deal with. Not disagreeing with Guraj, because I think he makes a bunch of the domains overlap, but just a different angle of looking at the problem.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Edward, coming to you, where do you see these use cases of unstructured data and how do you think it's going to evolve?
Well, I think that Guraj and Rich gave very complete answers to the first question. And I would add to that first that I believe there's one thing we tend to overlook about unstructured data. And many times when we build our 2x2 matrices, like a spreadsheet, and drop things into relational tables, what we lose is the context of the information. And that's an important point, I think, to keep in mind, because in some cases, when you have the context already provided, it gives you a starting place for understanding the meaning of what you say. For instance, we talk about a use case here. I'm very aware and was involved a bit in a use case where the group that was doing the research was for a European police or law enforcement intelligence group, and they were looking into the area of human trafficking that was occurring in Europe at the time, mostly coming from the eastern part of Europe. And they were not able to find any insights working through structured data. So they started to try something different using actual documents that were police reports. And then from there, trying to understand how they could develop any relationships among the changes or the differences or similarities in the data items that were being reported. And based upon that, they were able to actually, at that time, bust something like 6 human trafficking rings. Only, because the data already had the context, and that provided an awful lot of more information than they had from a structured table. So I think that the whole area of understanding the context of data and using that to supplement the structured data we have will be very interesting. For instance, a lot of the data that's being created now is really Internet of Things data coming off of machines. Having had some experience doing that in my career, what I could tell you is a lot of it's about how you understand those streaming events or how those events are created, and then the analytical techniques that start to allow us to see when something changes and what that means. I mean, for instance, whether it's an aircraft engine or a disease, there's usually a marker somewhere of a change that's about to happen. And if you can mine that data to understand where those markers exist, it opens up a whole world now of possibilities to see, where things are moving and using predictive analytics. And I'm sure Garage works with this a lot in the market, but that's really where I see a lot of this going right now.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We've talked a little bit then about use cases. Let's look at the business benefits, and coming back to you, Rich, to talk about the business benefits of harnessing unstructured data. Is it sort of still a nice to have or need to know thing? Obviously in compliance it's a have to have, but as you see it, are people really grasping this, and what benefits are they gaining?
Let's face it, no one really wants to pay for compliance, but the way I see this is the benefits of gaining stewardship and understanding and taking some degree of control over your data at large, rather than specific streams of data. And I think Garage and Ed, both made really great points about how you need to operate in a domain with a particular stream of data in the context of a business process to potentially leverage unstructured data for benefits. For me, fundamentally 101 for an organization to get a grip of its data at large for compliance purposes. And so I think on that basis, as you say, it's no longer a nice to have. It's kind of a need to have for the ability to respond to unexpected events. And I think that's the point for me, is when the next thing that hits a business is really unknown, and to build out the disciplines of being able to leverage, understand, and manage, steward your data in response to an event is a very costly thing to do. And so, it's our view that organizations need to be building persistent maps of their data so that they are better positioned to respond to any given particular event, or leverage that data and feed it into in a particular stream. So Ed mentioned a police case. How do you gather that data when you realize that you need to do something with your unstructured data in the wild? How do you ensure that you can get to it quickly, have the disciplines and expertise in place so that you can reach out, grab it, and use it and exploit it at the point of need? And so it's a long way of saying, for my mind, it's a must-have that organizations understand their data at large so that they can enable these deeper, more insightful investigations and activities as a part of habit.
Okay, thank you very much, Rich. Garage, what would you say? Nice to have or must have, and where do you see the business benefits? Garage, that's one for you. Hey, nice to have, must have. Where are the business benefits?
I missed it. Was that for me? It's
Sorry?
a little hard to hear.
Oh, okay, sorry. Let me say that again. The question is the unstructured data a nice to have thing or a must have thing? And where are the business benefits if you're using it? I think Garage must be having a little bit of difficulty with his audio there. We can come back. Don't worry, we can come back. Whilst we are you there again? Okay, let's run another audience poll while we get Garage back up and running on the audio. So before we talk about, let's go back again then. Unstructured data, nice to have, need to have, and what are the business benefits?
Okay, so it's still a little muffled, but I'm gonna assume you're asking me what are the business benefits?
Yeah.
And that, so, I mean, there's certainly many. I think, like, fundamentally, it's fairly important. Essentially to capture as much of this unstructured data as possible. Historically, it's just been discarded because it's difficult to really capture and keep in a traditional data structure. There's tremendous value there, and I think that's part of the learning process among organizations, is recognizing that there is value, whether it's from internal email content, the degree to which you can extract from the data from website, mobile data, on and else. So therefore, capturing as much as possible gives you a comprehensive, very wide narrative, and that's what allows to be able to extract the valuable insights. But I think that's fundamentally it's fairly important. It's just not. It hasn't been really widely adopted yet, and I think part of it is creating let's say like a data lake, the infrastructure to capture this, and then the second layer is, okay, how do we organize it, and then how do we do we have a team of people to extract relevant insights, domain experts, subject matter experts, sort of cross-functional teams, and I think that's it's an area which continues to be adopted across organizations, but it's been relatively slow to this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Guraj. Thanks for that. Okay, you have a head start on me. The poll is in process, and let's look at the numbers if we can. So this is the challenges to sourcing and integrating unstructured data. And as so often in these instances, poor data quality and consistency come out top at 80%. Next, lack of skilled resources at 45%. Next, winning management buy-in and budget at 35%, and achieving regulatory compliance at 20%. Nobody today has no challenges, which is okay, I suppose, difficult for everybody. So thank you very much indeed for voting in. Let's get back to our speakers. Guraj, what do you think about that, and how do you see the challenges of sourcing and integrating unstructured data? Okay, I think we're having more trouble with Guraj's audio. Let me come to you, Edward. Would you like to talk about that first, about the poll and the challenges?
I think the poll is quite interesting because the big issues are quality, number one, and understanding the lack of resources for this. Now, quality, in data, especially unstructured data, is almost an untapped area. You think about this, almost move back in the process where we really understand well the idea of how we create structured data, and we do a lot of that, and doing it for years, but doing it with unstructured data really means we have to spend a lot of more time in analytics, understanding what data we're missing, how we fill in those data. It's quite a challenge, and poor data quality is number one there, and that's frankly an interesting place where there is little research, by the way, in how you would improve that. And I always point that out to people, that if you're in data science, the interesting part about it is, 2/3 of it is data prep and 1/3 of it is science, right? I mean, so much of it is all around the quality of the data set you're creating to be able to have the ability to start doing any kind of predictive analytics. So that's hard. And then having the resources that truly understand that, what I think of as the two biggest challenges once you get past the quality issue is really classifying it and cataloging it. And so not just catalog, but classifying and categorizing it in some ways now that you can make it available for analytics to take a look and try to do something with it. So there's an awful lot of pre-work, and that's why I gave the little data science story there. The challenges are not easy to overcome.
Okay, thank you, Guraj. I think you're back with us. I hope you are.
Yes.
How do you see the challenges of sourcing and integrating the data?
And it's absolutely true. the sourcing is essentially a challenge in and of itself, and within that, it's verifying authenticity, getting it into a format which is usable, the history around various sets of unstructured data, and also I think a large part, and probably an increasing part, is there's vast repositories of unstructured data, and there's data that's created continuously, but it's really understanding where does it belong in terms of the problem one's trying to solve, or the insights one is trying to extract. So you can have huge amounts of data, but it may not yield any incremental value relative to your existing set of, let's say, you've structured data. And I mean, this is certainly true in the financial markets. For example, when you're, very simple example is when you're trying to understand, sentiment, traditional ways, or you looking at things like volatility index, put call ratios. But if you look at, the streams of information from an unstructured basis that engage sentiment, are you getting are you getting more of an edge, let's say? And often the case is that you aren't, and so therefore, you have to really think through those type of questions when you're sourcing it. Then integrating it is, I think there are many challenges because if you don't have the correct infrastructure, piecing additional sets of data into your existing sort of data lake, can be problematic, and so it really requires some thought. Before you actually, go down this path, spend some time actually, really architecting all the way from sources down to the way you want to integrate it, and where are the business use cases and the divisions which would benefit, and things of that nature. So it's a continuous, I'd say that's actually a continuous challenge because for a number of reasons.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So, Rich, coming to you. These are problems of today very much. How can issues of data quality, consistency, data privacy, security, and ensuring compliance be addressed? And as you talk about these areas, perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit more about ActiveNav's approach.
Yeah, sure. I think I often find myself talking in contrast to experts like Ed and Garage, who are, in my understanding, are talking about the gathering of a particular set of streams related to a particular process or a particular business activity to analyze that in that context. ActiveNav comes at it from a different perspective, which is we talk about the first mile for any organization is to be able to understand their entire data estate, unstructured data estate, at a relatively consistent level. And in the diagram you've put on the screen here, that's our first mile. We talk about a T-shape where the breadth of an organization has an obligation to look after its entire data state. And the first mile is simply understanding the extent, scope, and the data in that estate, so that you can then stand a chance of provisioning and passing that information in some way to some sort of last mile activity, such as the ones Ed and Garage are talking about here. The point between first mile and last mile being that in unstructured data particularly, there's so much diversity, disorganization, and changing practice in data that you can't count on it being in any way organized when you first go look at it. And so ActiveNav sells software that lets organizations get a grip of their first mile, understand the breadth of the data, so that they can undertake these last mile activities. In our case, looking at things like cleanup, separation, post-breach analysis, sensitive data analysis, and data subject access requests. But we also see use cases where organizations take sets and feed them into deeper analytics, feed the data lake once they understand the context and once they've got a grip of it. And so that's the sense of how we approach the problem, which is the organization's general obligations to the stewardship, compliance, security, consistency, and management of its overall data estate.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Rich. That's interesting. Let me come back to you, Edward, and what would you add here in terms of addressing these very, very current problems?
Well, first of all, as Rich just addressed here in the first mile issue, the governance issues around privacy, security and compliance are paramount today. Any breach that one has is very costly. Any loss of data is very costly, not only to the company, but also to the of course to the customer or the person using the data. And that is number one, I think, the big piece everybody's focusing on today. And those requirements keep rising as more people work from home and are now starting to work off of edge devices, as opposed to everybody being hooked up to the corporate WAN. Now, quality in the sense of what is the actual quality of the unstructured data that you're going to look at, it is really a whole separate process here that is outside of the, I would say, the compliance risk, security management part of the value chain. And actually somebody, as I think Garage talked about quite well, really understanding, where is this data coming from? Is it complete? Is it incomplete? All those types of almost a pre-filtering concept need to be placed on it. And a lot of people are doing that today with computer vision technologies, for instance, where they're taking documents, understanding what's not in place, and then using automation technologies to try to go and improve the quality of the information before it moves to the next step in their business process. So in a sense, you have to break these things apart, I believe, and approach them from different angles, because they have different technologies you would use in your organization to try to address them.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Ed. And sticking with you, and considering Panzura's approach to unstructured data, how best can data be managed and enriched? For example, how can firms tag the data and use cognitive search tools to analyze and link data from different sources? So if you'd like to answer the question and tell us a little bit about what Panzura can offer here.
Yeah, no, we are focused on not only just storing data, but storing and providing access to data in near real time, no matter where it is. And how it's being structured for the organization. So in a hybrid environment today, as I just follow up on what I just mentioned, as more people start to work from their homes and away from the corporate WANs or LAN environments, what you're starting to see is a lot of hyper emerging silos. And in some cases, they're completely idiosyncratic. In other cases, it's all just downloading and keeping things away from the main data source and moving to the edge. And that's a real challenge today, because as that percentage of access and usage of the data increases, it provides challenges to how you do such things as locking of records or making them available. For instance, if somebody's making a change to a blueprint in a construction for architectural firm, and they've locked that data, that file for, they're making the change so that they can collaborate with everybody else, and let's say they've done it for a short period of time, maybe 20 minutes. The next time somebody sees it, they'll see that change immediately. Now, are you going to provide that same level of locking capability with the edge device when the person may be on a flight, somewhere across the United States or somewhere around the world? Not that that's happening a lot today, but it does happen. And in that case, you have a whole other way to have to think about it, and what you're going to, from an edge device to what you're going to do from attached to the WAN. Secondly, boy, the whole idea of how you take in data and then you make it useful. And I think Garage was talking about this. A lot of it's, of course, use dependent, and classifying and categorizing the data, so that they can be easily accessed. Using AI ops tools that help you do that, and other advanced analytical techniques. For instance, the case I talked about earlier here with the law enforcement application, frankly, they had to use a rather unique mathematical technique called formal concept analysis to quickly structure and show the relationships among the data, and to be able to make it very useful and then integrate with some of the structured data they had. And so from the compliance side, really, you need to think about what are your communities of interest. For instance, should everybody has access to everything, or who needs to have access to what and permissions to which data specifically, who needs to share what and how, and all that needs to be organized so that you understand how to provide it. And this is where I like to make the point of, I think we're moving from just an access environment to what's more of a logistically provisioned data environment based on demand. So in the past, we thought a lot about, I think, the supply side of the data we had, but I think in the future with all the edge devices, now we really have to take a logistical supply approach to understand what data has been used where, all the way down to when somebody logs in, well, this is Rich, and Rich uses, you know, these types of data sets on a regular basis, so we can forward provision them for Rich. And then secondarily, he can then go and search for other data that he might need in his environment. And that's really all driving toward something that's about ensuring that people have the data they need when they need it, and optimizing the costs all the way from the provisioning costs all the way down through storage. And you know, where we can do that at the most cost-effective manner for the use of the data within somebody's environment. So I think that's a lot, but I think that's really the approach here we're going to be seeing going forward. Think of it as if you were supplying consumer goods to some place, you would think of it as, what do I need to place where, and how much do I need to pre-provision where, so it can be readily accessed, and I can apply all of those other factors to it, such as you know, managing it from, you know, the perspective of communities of interest to permissions and all those things. So it's becoming a much more complex problem, but at the same time, one that has a lot of value to the organization in terms of both making the employees, helping the employees be productive, protecting the data, as well as providing all that at the best cost.
Okay, thank you, Edward. Coming to you, Guraj, what would you say in terms of how to manage and enrich the data?
I think those are all excellent points. And you know, managing the data, I think, is it's actually, I think, much more challenging than you know, probably is often given credit, and it's in part because in certainly in large organizations, the data is vast, and it covers a number of different areas, and so it's really time consuming to create the sort of the correct architecture, you know, the correct framework, not only for bringing the data in, but you know, organizing it in such a way that it can be efficiently accessed. Particularly, you know, because most of my work is in trading and financial markets. You know, it's a time sensitive issue, and large latency in accessing you know, these types of things can be problematic for a number of different reasons. So you know, the managing aspect is yeah, is fairly important, and you know, there's definitely improvements in terms of, you know, computational efficiency and things of that nature. And I think when, you know, at some future point when, you know, quantum architecture gets involved in, you know, alongside traditional, it'll be even vastly improved then. But until then, yeah, I consider it almost like a logistics / you know, combinatorial problem, you know, somewhat akin to, you know, the traveling salesperson, where, you know, trying to find, you know, right, like an efficient path for not only bringing it in, but also, you know, taking it out for its various business use cases.
Okay, thank you, Guraj. Thank you very much indeed. And before we talk about machine learning, let's see how our audience is doing with machine learning. So could we have another poll, please? There we go. The question this time: to what extent has your organization deployed machine learning, and how successful is it? Please go ahead and vote now. Thank you very much indeed. Obviously, this is still an early days for machine learning. 30% of our audience, no, I should start with 35% are using it to a medium extent, and it is successful. 30% to a small extent, but they're still at the POC stage. That perhaps is where most people probably are on average. 15% to a medium extent, success is limited, and 10% both to a great extent, it is successful or the success is limited. Guraj, what do you think of that? And how do you see firms developing and implementing machine learning to benefit from all this unstructured data we've been talking about?
I think that's fairly reflective of what noticed at both small and large organizations. I think in part that machine learning in general has gotten tremendous press and tremendous coverage in the media, but it's usually for very specific use cases. And I think part of the challenge is many organizations will essentially bring on a large team of ML engineers and data scientists and just say go at it. And until there is a defined sort of business use case and some vision as to what's trying to be solved or try to the value trying to be created, you can use any type of ML algorithms and you won't go anywhere. With respect to financial markets in particular, because of the non-stationary nature of asset prices, most firms who applied sort of traditional ML approaches have not been successful. In fact, I think Man Financial in their internal work, they found almost like a 90% failure rate. But having said that, I think it's an application or in an industry which is still in its early stages, and I think to do it successfully, you need really a cross-functional team of machine language specialists, but also domain experts. And I think even more increasingly, at least in some areas I've worked in, bringing really experts outside, really non-technical experts. And the reason I say that is because the algorithms are almost as only as good as the human mind, that encapsulates some of the thought processes around it. And so, I've pushed at least more recently for a quantum mental approach, just kind of integrating both, traditional, human sort of mindset along with ML approaches as a way to go. And we're starting to see some success in that area.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Guraj. And I have an audience question for you, and it says, related to financial institutions, what are your thoughts on the emergence of no-code and low-code data automations platforms to manage and enrich unstructured data? There's a lot of new things being pushed together there. Any thoughts on that?
I think the idea is to basically increase the audience or the audience of participants in this space, and so it's certainly beneficial for more or less really I don't want to say basic, but let's say novice programmers or non-programmers in essentially trying to access emerging technologies and algorithms in a way which is digestible. So it increases the number of I guess potential personnel involved, but it doesn't really it's not, I wouldn't say it's helpful for sophisticated, complicated business use cases, because those require like a really deep understanding, both from the business side but also from the technical side.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And coming to another very current issue, the cloud. So Rich, over to you to talk about how financial institutions can use cloud technologies to support management and use of unstructured data and the kinds of skills and technologies they need.
Yeah, so for us, what we're seeing for not only our financial institution customers, but all of our customers, is the need to build a map of their global inventory. And I think at this point, the cloud really comes into its own, because it provides you a kind of a persistent architecture which enables you to aggregate first of all the data and the inventory of your overall data holding, unstructured data holdings, but also readily available tooling to query and access that data. And so there are two parts from our perspective, which is using the cloud to build a map of your overall data, store that map and make it accessible, and secondly providing the query tools, the visualization to give access to that information as well, so that each part of the business can take ownership of their and responsibility for their respective data maps. Skills and tools, I kind of like Garage's angle here, which is there's a mixture of data stewardship in sort of organizing the data, cleaning and gathering data sets, and that part is kind of the mundane logistics really of it, but also the non-data domain experts, the non-data experts as well, the business, enabling the business to become more familiar with its data and becoming conversant with their obligations for the data. I think those are the things from the general management of unstructured data that I think financial institutions, any organization, needs to attend to. And this is all a part of the first mile responsibility for the entire data estate, as opposed to the particular skills and tools one needs if one is gathering analytics for a particular business case. And as Garage says, once you get into that particular business case, there's a new domain of skills, and Ed will make this point, I'm sure, as well, that you need to engage with that particular context.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Rich. Would you like to follow that up, Edward?
Oh, I'd like to add to that a little bit. That first of all, right on the money here with Rich and Garage. I think one of the issues why people have problems with getting positive results out of machine learning projects, number one is what we addressed earlier: poor data quality, number one. And then the second one is lack of resources to do this. Now, let's assume that I've been involved in projects that have actually been successful with some of these, and I can tell you the amount of time you spend on ensuring the quality of the data is far more than you actually spend on the science part of it with the algorithms. Now, this is where the cloud can really help us in a lot of ways. One way is that in the cloud we have resources that we can currently see as constraints. For instance, using the cloud, we have a block storage offering we're about to bring out that lets you almost have unlimited cache. Imagine what you could do if you had 100 terabytes of cache in the cloud you could play with, right? What kind of problems could you start to solve with that? What compute power could you bring to that? And how would you use that in a virtual basis to now really think about all the data you could pull off of, classify, categorize, and then put into that kind of environment to look for patterns, right? This opens up entirely new realms for analysis that were not available to us before. All of this, though, again, all goes back to the first part, right? If we don't have the proper data sets and the data sets aren't of high quality, they're going to be useless, right? Bad problem. Bad answer coming out. But the beauty here is, as we start to back up the value chain now, let's back it up into the quality problem using computer vision on massive amounts of data, and a lot of it's dark data. It's almost a case where we can now, I used the term once called data fracking, and got a lot of environmental people yelling at me. But what I was trying to say was, this now lets us do something we weren't able to do before, which is to extract value out of data that was previously unavailable to us, and using tools like the cloud and like the unlimited versions of power and combinations that we have to do this, we can now move much more quickly through this chain of events to allow us to bring data to the market or insights to the market that were not available and are not available to us without extremely high cost if we're doing it in our on-prem environments.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And staying with you, Edward, can you provide us a quick example of where you've seen this going well?
Well, absolutely. For one, I've been involved in a number of cases where we were trying to predict outcomes for disease or somebody's treatment path for a disease. And most of that data, some of that data is being captured, some of it's not, a lot of it's unstructured, but being able to bring that data, into a really focused data set, and then being able to use, machine learning and deep learning to try to really understand the relationships or among the data, and more importantly, where those markers might be that could lead us down the path to conclusions, of course, all based on asking a proper question, a well-defined question, can really get us to substantial benefits. I mean, one of the reasons that they've been able to bring the latest rounds of COVID vaccine to market quickly is because of the use of all the unstructured data coming out of some of the tests and all of the data that they put into the cloud to be able to use to analyze the results that would have taken years in the past. So all of this one perfect case here where without this type of approach, we would never have seen this. In the case of capital markets, I worked with one company specifically that used machine learning as well as pulling data off of unstructured sources, massaging it, and building what amounted to be a 4-level risk model that really focused on minimizing drawdowns, over X period of time. And they've been producing some very interesting returns in the market. It's a kind of a startup hedge fund that's been doing this. So there's a lot of benefits here.
Okay, thank you. Rich, do you have an example for us?
Yeah, I mentioned contract analytics a while back, but I'll go around it again. This was around the outsourcing, the requirement to outsource a particular service, and the common with my theme, which organizations just don't have a grip of the data at large. This is about going out and harvesting the entirety of contracts for outsource activities, identifying those in the wild, putting them together into a contract management environment so that the extent of the risk exposure could be analyzed and enable that outsourcing activity. And so that was the use case that brought it to light, and then the continued value of having a centralized contract management, and rather than contracts spread across the data universe, it should be obvious to everyone in the audience.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, both of you. So coming to our final slide, and let me ask our experts to give a bit of advice, just briefly. Guraj, please, would you go first?
Advice, I think fundamentally it's important to keep an open mind. Certainly when you're a stakeholder in an organization. And if the idea is if there's some interest piqued that there could be great value, then do your research, do the homework. There's a number of papers on business use cases, and understand very precisely where it can benefit your organization, and then what's going to be required in terms of personnel, in terms of our infrastructure, things of that nature. And I think you find that almost in every case there's at least some benefit, and it's just a question of arriving to what's best in your particular case.
Thank you very much. Edward, what would you provide as advice for our audience?
Well, I think the first thing is understand the use case. That's number one. What is it you're doing with this, and what value is being or is expected to be achieved with it? Number one, and that can vary, by the way, for different people. If you're a storage administrator, it might be the cost of storage for you to be finding your best ROI on that. If you're on the use side of it, it might be having the data available to you when you need it, where you need it, and how it's provisioned. All of those things have value that can be quantified. So I would want to understand that first as to what that was. And then secondly, as I went back and looked at this in the unstructured side, I'd be very clear about what data does this represent, and understand the categorization and classification of this data, and then how might I make that available for use with other data. So somebody might be able to drive out insights that no one has thought of yet, but that could be there as well. And lastly, quality, 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 because if the data doesn't have quality, nobody benefits.
Absolutely. Applies into so many areas of our world, doesn't it? Rich, a few final words from you, please.
Yeah, I'd just say in seeking particular business benefits in the way that Guraj and Ed espouse, don't lose track of the basic obligation to manage and your data overall, your dark data and your data in the wild. Getting that first mile data map in place is not as hard as it seems, and it enables all of these other use cases because it means you're working from a managed set. And you know, it reduces the cost of your data obligations, and also begins to build the practices that you need to leverage that data. So don't lose sight of that. The first logistics of actually getting a grip of where your data is, what it looks like, and how you exercise some basic stewardship across it.
Thanks very much indeed, and thank you to all of you. And of course, thank you to Panzura and ActiveNav for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we wrap up, just a quick reminder about some A-Team webinars and resources that are coming up. Looking into next year, on the 19th of January, we'll be discussing data management for analytics and market surveillance. And on the 21st of January, we'll be looking at how to drive down the cost of entity identification and client lifecycle management. You can register for these webinars using the link on your screen. You can also download our best read publication, the Regulatory Data Handbook, updated for 2020-2021 and including new regulations as well as early coverage of how Brexit may change the UK regulatory regime. But you'll find lots in there, not just UK regulations, but global regulations of all kinds. And finally, I'd like to thank Guraj, Edward and Rich for sharing their expertise today. And thank you to all of you who have listened to the webinar. Please complete our post-webinar survey and we will let you know when a recording is available. This is our last webinar of the year, so look forward to sharing with you again next year. Thanks again and goodbye.